Welcome to today's episode of the Cross Labs podcast, On My Mind.
Well, maybe there's a topic of the difference between telling that a piece of AI art is made by an AI versus telling that a piece of human art is made by a human, because they're not symmetric. So, like, if you had something that was generating songs, you would probably never have it spontaneously generate 6 minutes of silence. So there are certain pieces of human art that are unmistakably, at least currently, human art. But there's a lot of human art that is actually quite mistakable for AI art.
Good art is the one that the AI never generates.
Does it actually make it good?
If nowadays, if you would be able to convincingly show that this thing that you did, an AI wouldn't generate this, then that's probably a sign of quality.
I think it will become necessary to do that in a lot of contexts, but I think that it's actually opposed in a lot of cases to quality.
Okay, maybe I should say fine art. Or whatever.
Like
highbrow art. Like I'm not talking about stuff where you commission something. It's like obviously nobody went to John Cage and said, "Make me a piece of music that doesn't have any."
But that's a good example. Do you think that 433 is creative and good art? Just listen to the piano performance. Sit there for 4 minutes 33 seconds, and then come out thinking, "Wow, that was amazing."
Of course.
I personally love it. I think it's I think it's creative because in the sense that it defies your expectations.
I personally hate when you go to an art gallery or a museum and you have like a very long 4 pages long text explaining why this banana taped in the wall is an art piece. I'm like, you're a good writer, and that's also a very good art form, but that's not art. So like, it's a separate thing. Like, if you see a banana glued to the wall, tell me that you go there and be like, oh my God.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's lots of people that don't need the 4 pages for this because they are in the art space, basically. A lot of art is very self-referential. And so that's why these 4 pages, like, if you're like a person who's into art, then you don't need them either.
But then I would generally just clap for 7 minutes standing ovation if someone goes without reading the 4 pages, seeing the banana glued to the wall, and come up with a text that even resembles the 4 pages. I would like, dude, you are enlightened and like out of like, wow. And now my second question is, what if we have an embodied AI artist, blah, 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 and then that AI goes and glue the banana for the first time into the wall? Would we say like, oh my God, this AI changed art before and after, or is that a capability only reserved for humans?
The thing when, especially if we're talking about fine art and the self-referentiality is that a lot of it, is what people are willing to be impacted by as well. And if someone says, I know it's by an AI, so I don't care, then they know it's by an AI and they don't care. People can debate whether or not something's art, forever, but I don't think that kind of question is almost never meaningful because it's really about power, right? I want to impose my gatekeeping standards, or I want to defend this as being this thing and exclude the things that I don't like, and so on. And so, like, I wouldn't say that the silence isn't art, even though it's not something that I would listen to.
The thing about John Cage's silence is also there's only one. It's not true that it's only surprising, obviously. Like, it's not only surprising. There's lots of...
When we're talking about whether or not you could uniquely identify it as human-made, we are talking about the surprisal of that piece in the context of an AI, statistical model.
In some sense, every piece of music is as unlikely as every other, no? I mean...
No.
No, yeah, no. So, sampling in techno music is a big thing, right? So will it be possible to like train a model into sampling different, like, I don't know, classical music or whatever, and then ask it to produce only stuff out of distribution within the sampling like genre, like to make stuff that is super weird and that has never been created, sampling on the same stuff they do?
Yeah, you can even ask what If you ask for the extreme of it, you'll get something that's like really crazy noise, and it'll just be like the random noise bot that Martin mentioned.
No, like teaching the musical structures and whatnot, and what is a chord, what is a verse, and within those boundaries, something.
Yeah, exactly. You need to have something that is like pushing from both sides. So you don't want the thing that is the most unexpected. You want the thing that is simultaneously like either meeting a constraint but maximally surprising given that it meets the constraint, or something that is surprising enough but not more surprising than that.
Yeah.
So you say you want something that is like, very unlikely that this would be produced, but still could be produced 1 in a million times, but not like 1 in 10 to the 80.
I'll be amazed if that ever exists. Then someone gets inspired in that, like not passing it as his or her own work, inspired on that, produce that, and then now this is a very creative musician. But if I say this was AI, then it's going to be like, yeah, it's a bunch of noise actually.
In a way, you're right, Oneris. Like at least the naive implementation of saying this AI art is just resampling or being inspired by humans without giving them, it's violating their intellectual property.
I think on that stuff, I think that unless it's flat out copying pixel by pixel, then I would relate that to how the process of training yourself to become an artist would work like. So if I want to be a war photographer or a street photographer, then my photos cannot have any resemblance to any previous photographer's work. No, I don't think so. I don't know, like for example, Henry Cartier-Bresson wrote The Decisive Moment. So he was like specifically wanting to teach people how to take some street photos and that stuff. So it would be okay for me to take photos that resemble that style and that methodology because he was specifically teaching, right? But then if I go to a war zone and I take photos that look like Robert Capa, he wasn't teaching, that was his work. Should he be able to sue me because I took photos on his style? I don't think so. Every photographer, every artist, not just in photos, but in any other art form, you will always look at something and be like, wow, that's interesting. I'll do my own take into my aesthetic, whatever, and my message I want to communicate. And no one ever gets sued because of Ed Sheeran got sued because of that, but that's a different one. I always find it super weird when we're protecting humans so hard out of AI, but we do the same anyway, so it's like, Well,
I mean, laws are for people, right? They're not in general matters of, physics or principle or mathematics. There because that's the agreement so that everyone participates in the same society. At the same time, I tend to think that the kind of locking down the Creative Commons stuff doesn't really benefit people in the end. It benefits Disney rather than much more than it benefits the individual artists. So, but I tend to take a very radical anti-copyright position. I would say the answer is to basically make it impossible to copyright anything that comes out of a generative model. If you have an output of a generative model or an implicit possible output of a generative model, you can't patent it, you can't copyright it. It was trained on the public domain, so the outputs cannot be restricted because that would be the same as restricting the public domain. If you did by hand modifications to it, then you can copyright those modifications that you made. That will make it so that at least it won't save the people who are doing commissions of, Sonic the Hedgehog for someone. But for, commercial artists, that will mean that companies who want to make a game and copyright the game so people can't just pirate it, they are going to be motivated to have a human artist touch every piece of art in the game. That will create the financial incentive where the majority of the money that is going to artists is. The kind of fringe stuff will get upset by this. But similarly, if someone distributes the weights of your trained AI that was trained on publicly available art, then you can't sue them. This is, of course, not how it is now, but this is the solution I'm proposing.
Same for OpenAI's large language models, basically.
Yeah, like it might be that if someone broke in and stole it, OpenAI could still take them to court for the break-in, but they wouldn't be able to, if they trained that thing on external data, I don't think they should be able to call it a trade secret or an industrial secret or
It's not industrial espionage. It's just trespass.
Yeah, exactly. Because, if they're basically saying we can do this because it's in the commons, then like it should be in the commons.
So you mean they
Yeah.
should have their model open, basically?
Well, the subtle thing is if you trained something on the commons, but it was just on your computer, you wouldn't be forced under this model to open that. So if you just use that to generate, stuff, and you just distributed the art that your personal model generated, it wouldn't be like people could knock on your door and say, hey, give me the model. But if the model did get out there, you couldn't basically say, no, you're not allowed to use this model because it's mine, or, you're not allowed to redistribute this model because it was stolen from me and it's mine. You could
Like
say
Llama?
like Llama, for example. That would just be like fair game. Anyone wants to distribute it, they can do it.
Wow, that's such a good idea.
That's it for this week's episode of the Cross Labs podcast On My Mind. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll be the first to know when the next episode is out. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.